What makes some people withstand life's storms while others crumble under pressure? In this modern retelling of Jesus' timeless parable, follow the story of Eliab, the wise builder who builds his house on solid rock, and Reuben, the foolish builder who chooses the easy path on shifting sand. Through vivid storytelling, emotional moments, and deep spiritual insights, this video explores how faith, obedience, and wise choices create an unshakable foundation for your life. Learn how Jesus' teachings apply not only to your spiritual journey but also to everyday challenges, relationships, and personal growth. To truly understand this teaching, let us step into the sandals of those men. Let us walk where they walked and see through their eyes. Eliab, the wise builder, was a man of simple means. His hands, calloused and thick from years of labor in the fields, were a testament to his life. He was not rich, nor did he command influence among the leaders of the synagogue. He was just a man with a family to protect and a dream to provide them with a secure future. He was rich in something else: conviction. At night, when the stars shone like scattered diamonds above the Galilean hills, Eliab would sit outside with his wife, Miriam, and their two small children. The crickets chirped a steady rhythm, and the air cooled, bringing relief from the day's oppressive heat. The children played with smooth river stones, piling them into tiny towers and laughing as they tumbled. Miriam would watch Eliab, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. "You work yourself to the bone, husband," she said softly one evening, her voice a gentle balm. "Every day you climb that ridge. Every night you return with your hands torn and your back bent. Why choose the hill when the sand by the river is so easy? The journey alone takes an hour each way." Eliab turned toward her, his face lit by the firelight, his expression a mix of weary resolve and deep love. "Because I have seen the storms, Miriam. I have watched the waters rise and become a furious beast, carrying away homes as if they were nothing more than straw. I have seen the fear in children's eyes when the walls shook and the roofs split open. I will not build my family's shelter on fear. My house shall stand, not because of my strength, but because of the foundation." Miriam lowered her gaze, her heart torn between fear for his health and admiration for his resolve. "Then may the Lord, who is our rock and our fortress, give you strength," she whispered, her words a prayer on the night air. The days stretched long, a monotonous cycle of toil under the relentless sun. Eliab rose before dawn, the air still cool and crisp, kissed his children's foreheads as they still slept, and began the arduous climb to the ridge. With each trip, he carried stones, some small enough to fit in his palm, others so heavy that his knees shook under their weight. The muscle in his back screamed, but his determination never wavered. He mixed mortar with a combination of sand and lime, sweat dripping from his brow into the gritty mixture as though his very lifeblood was binding the foundation together. Children from the village sometimes followed him, their youthful curiosity a stark contrast to his serious labor. They watched from a distance, their small faces a mix of awe and bewilderment. "Eliab!" One boy, no older than 7, shouted one afternoon, his voice echoing in the stillness. "Why do you carry stones so far, when the sand below is smooth and ready? My uncle built his house by the river in half the time it has taken you to lay a single wall." Eliab wiped the sweat and grit from his brow with the back of his hand, smiling gently at the boy. His clothes were stained with dust and grime, his skin a deep bronze from the sun. "Tell your uncle," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "that when the rains fall and the floods rise, I will gladly shelter his family in my home, for my house is upon the rock." The boy frowned, puzzled by the strange reply, but the image of Eliab's unyielding determination stuck with him long after. Though Eliab's determination was strong, he was not without moments of weakness. Some nights he lay awake on his simple mat, staring at the beams of unfinished wood above him, the silence of the night magnifying his doubt. What if I'm wrong? What if all this effort is wasted? What if the terrifying storms never come, and I am only a fool among fools? But then he would rise quietly, step outside beneath the night sky, and gaze upon the ridge where his foundation stood firm against the moonlight. The sight of the unmovable stone, a testament to his conviction, brought a sense of peace. He would recall the psalm he had learned as a boy, a soothing melody of words that had anchored his spirit since childhood. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge. Each time the words returned to his lips, his heart grew steady again. One late afternoon, as Eliab wrestled with a massive, jagged stone near the edge of the hill, an old shepherd with a weathered face passed by, leading his flock toward higher ground. The old man stopped, his eyes filled with a lifetime of watching the land and sky. He watched Eliab struggle and finally spoke, his voice raspy from years of shouting to his sheep. Why labor so hard, friend? Do you not know the river's edge offers soft ground and easy digging? Why wound your hands upon stone? Eliab set the stone into its place with a grunt of effort, then straightened his back, breathing hard. Because storms are certain, the sand shifts with the waters, but this rock, he tapped it with his bruised and calloused hand, does not move. A house built upon the rock is a house that will stand. The shepherd tilted his head, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. You are wise, he said, before moving on, his flock trailing behind him. And though his words were simple, they filled Eliab with fresh strength. At last, after months of painstaking toil, the foundation was finished. It was a broad, flat expanse of solid stone, sunk deep into the earth. Miriam brought the children up the ridge one evening to see it. They ran across the smooth stone floor, their small feet pattering softly, laughing as their voices echoed into the valley. Miriam stood beside Eliab, tears of pride welling in her eyes. It is not yet a house, she said, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. No, Eliab agreed, watching his children dance in the twilight. But it is a beginning that will never be shaken. And in that moment, the foundation was not just stone. It was faith. It was hope. It was obedience to the unseen wisdom of God, the very essence of what it meant to build one's life on the solid rock of Christ's teachings. Not far from Eliab's ridge, another man had begun his work. His name was Reuben. Unlike Eliab, Reuben was known in the village for his laughter and easy charm. He was quick with a joke, quicker with a bargain, and always eager to prove he was smarter than the rest. Where Eliab was steady and methodical, Reuben was swift and restless. He saw the world as a place of opportunity, a place to seize the moment and build a reputation. When word spread that Eliab had chosen the stony ridge for his home, Reuben scoffed, a loud, booming laugh that carried through the village. Why waste a year's worth of sweat on stubborn rock when the ground below is soft and ready? Look at this sand by the river, smooth, level, and easy to shape. A man with sense knows better than to break his back hauling stones uphill. Watch me, and you will see a house rise before your very eyes. And so Reuben began his work. He chose the spot near the water, where the soil was rich and pliable, and the river provided easy access. He didn't have to carry a single stone. With little effort, he dug deep into the sand and began laying his foundation. Within days, villagers stopped to watch. Walls were rising quickly, beams already in place. Children pointed and marveled. See how fast Reuben builds. His house will be ready before summer ends. Reuben basked in their praise. He was a showman, and this was his finest performance. Standing tall upon the sand, he shouted toward Eliab on the ridge, his voice echoing across the valley. How many stones have you hauled today, my friend? I will be sitting in the shade of my roof while you are still sweating under the sun. The villagers laughed, nodding. Reuben is clever. Why suffer when the easy path lies before you? By the time Eliab had laid only the lower courses of stone, Reuben's house already stood high and proud. Its plaster walls gleamed white in the sun, its windows framed with polished wood, and a garden of herbs was already planted near the entrance. At night, lamplight glowed warmly from within, and the sound of Reuben's voice singing drifted across the valley. Eliab's house, by comparison, looked like nothing, a skeleton of rocks and dust, a testament to endless, unglamorous labor. Many began to whisper, perhaps Reuben is the wise one after all. Miriam, Eliab's wife, confessed one night, her voice heavy with the weight of doubt. Their roof is finished, their walls strong. Our children ask why they cannot already play in a home of their own. Eliab took her hand gently, his touch a silent reassurance. Do not look only at the walls, Miriam. Look at the ground beneath them. Reuben's foundation is sand. The floods will come, and the ground will betray him. What looks strong today may not endure tomorrow. But still, doubt tugged at her heart, and she was not alone. One evening, as Reuben reclined outside his new home, drinking sweet wine and basking in the praise of his neighbors, a friend asked him, "Are you not afraid the river will rise and trouble your house?" Reuben laughed loudly, the sound bouncing off his new walls. "Afraid? My friend, storms come and storms go. We cannot live every day fearing the sky. The wise man takes his chances and enjoys the moment. Why dig into stone when the sand is soft and the building is easy? Look, while Eliab is still breaking his back, I sleep under a roof." His words carried the spirit of the foolish builder, the man in Jesus' parable who hears his teachings but does not put them into practice, who lives for ease rather than endurance. And those who listened nodded, thinking his words clever. For to them, Reuben's house looked no different than any other, perhaps even better. Soon, Reuben invited the village to celebrate his finished home. Tables were set under a large tent, bread and fish laid out in abundance, and jars of wine opened. Music filled the night air. As laughter rang out, Eliab passed quietly by, his clothes dusty from work, his face worn with fatigue. Reuben caught sight of him and called out with a mocking grin, "Come, Eliab, leave your rocks and join us in a real house. Why waste your life building slowly when the joy of comfort is already here?" The people laughed, and for a moment, Eliab felt the sting of humiliation. But he bowed his head, murmuring a prayer under his breath. "Lord, let truth be my guide, not the praise of men." Weeks passed. Reuben lived in comfort, often boasting to travelers about his quick success. His family praised him, saying, "You have given us security and shelter. Truly, you are a wise man." Yet beneath the surface, the foundation of sand was shifting. Tiny, almost invisible cracks appeared near the corners of the house where the ground settled unevenly. Reuben dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "The plaster will cover it. The house is strong enough." But the sky was changing. The winds carried a warning, a subtle shift in the air that spoke of an impending change. Clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy with rain, their bellies a dark, bruised purple. And in the stillness before the storm, the difference between the house upon the rock and the house upon the sand was about to be revealed. The storm did not arrive quietly. It roared down upon Galilee like an army sweeping in from the heavens. The skies, once a clear stretch of stars, turned black as ink. The moon disappeared behind swollen clouds, and lightning cracked across the horizon like fiery spears, illuminating the hills in a sudden, blinding flash. The thunder followed, a deep, resonant rumble that shook the very ground. The villagers had felt storms before, but this one was different, heavier, angrier, as if creation itself were shaking with a primal fury. The wind came first, a monstrous gale rushing through the valley with a howl that bent trees to the ground. Dust and grit, picked up from the dry riverbed, stung the eyes of men who tried to tie down their carts and cover their grain. The air carried a thick, earthy smell of wet soil before the first drop even fell. When the rain began, it was as though the heavens had opened wide. Sheets of water fell with relentless force, drumming against roofs, flooding alleys and turning paths into muddy, fast-moving rivers. A boy shouted from his doorway, his voice tight with panic, "Father, the river, it's rising." And when the villagers ran to see, their hearts sank. The quiet stream that once trickled gently through the valley now churned with violent foam, a brown, angry torrent. It clawed at its banks, swallowing reeds and bushes, stretching wider with every heartbeat. Inside his brand new house upon the sand, Reuben tried to calm his family. He lit more lamps, though their flames sputtered against the drafts that slipped through the walls. "This will pass," he said, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "Our house is strong." But his youngest daughter, trembling, pointed to the floor. "Father, the ground is moving." Reuben's chest tightened with a cold dread. He knelt, pressing his hand to the floorboards. The sand beneath them quivered, alive as though the earth itself were shifting. A faint cracking sound whispered from the walls, a sound that turned his blood cold. The storm had found his weakness. "Bring the buckets," he barked, as water seeped through the floorboards. They scrambled, scooping frantically, but every bucket tossed out the door was replaced by 100 drops, pouring in through the roof and windows. The wind tore at the shutters until one ripped free, slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. Rain gusted into the room, soaking the bedding, extinguishing the lamps. His wife cried out as the darkness swallowed them. Reuben's pride began to crumble with the plaster around him. High above, Eliab's home upon the rock stood against the storm's fury. The rain beat upon the roof like war drums, but the beams did not shift. The wind clawed at the walls, but the stones held their ground, locked deep into the ridge. The water rushed down the slopes, seeking a place to gather, but it could not reach the heights where Eliab had labored to build. Inside, the family huddled near the hearth. The fire crackled defiantly, holding its warmth even as the storm raged outside. Miriam whispered to her children, her voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "Be still, little ones. Your father built well. This house will stand." Eliab knelt with them, his voice steady even as thunder shook the air. "We will not fear. The Lord is our rock, our fortress, our deliverer. In him we are safe." They sang softly to drown the roar of the storm, their voices rising like candles in the dark. And though fear pressed against their walls, faith filled their hearts. The storm grew wilder still. Branches snapped like dry twigs, roofs flew loose, and animals broke from their pens. Their panicked cries carried on the wind. The villagers shouted over the din, pulling ropes and grabbing torches, trying to salvage what they could before the river swallowed it. One neighbor, shielding his face from the rain, pointed a trembling finger toward Reuben's house. "Look at the sand. It's washing away beneath him." Another cried, his voice thick with a mix of awe and terror. Eliab was right. Only the rock stands firm. The people watched helplessly as the two homes became a living parable. Lightning flashed, revealing Reuben's house trembling on its sandy base, while Eliab's stood immovable upon the ridge. Reuben's voice was hoarse now, shouting to his family, to himself, to the storm. "Hold, you must hold," but the sand gave no answer. With every wave of water, the foundation slipped further. The walls groaned like wounded beasts. A terrifying crack split the night as the corner of the roof buckled, then gave way. His wife screamed, clutching the children as plaster rained down around them. And then it came, the final surge. The river, swollen with unstoppable force, struck the base of the house with a crash like thunder. The sand dissolved, and the structure lurched violently. With a scream of tearing beams, the foolish builder's house collapsed. Wood shattered, clay splintered. In a single moment, all that Reuben had built, his pride, his labor, his hurried achievement, fell into ruin. The sound carried across the valley like a trumpet blast, and great was its fall. When dawn finally broke, silence returned. A heavy, sobering silence. The air was cool and clean, washed by the rain. The villagers crept out from their shelters to see the aftermath. Uprooted trees littered the ground. The river, though calmer, carried debris downstream. But their eyes were drawn to the ridge where Eliab's house still stood, smoke rising gently from its chimney. His family emerged, weary but safe, their faith confirmed. Down below, Reuben's family knelt in the mud, staring at the wreckage of what once was their home. Neighbors gathered around them, some offering blankets, others shaking their heads in sorrow. And though no one spoke it aloud, all remembered the words of the teacher. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The foolish man builds his house upon the sand. Now those words were carved into memory, with the force of the storm itself. The sun had barely risen when the villagers crept toward the riverbank. The storm had spent its fury, leaving the landscape marred with broken trees, uprooted fences, and scattered livestock. But for all who looked, one sight stood out more than the destruction: the ruins of Reuben's house, swallowed by the swollen waters, a testament to the folly of convenience. Reuben knelt in the mud, chest heaving, fingers trembling as he sifted through the debris. Splintered beams tore at his hands, plaster crumbled under his touch. His eyes, once bright with pride, were hollow, reflecting the wreckage around him. "Everything," he whispered, voice breaking. "Everything is gone." His wife pressed the children close, their faces streaked with tears and mud. We are alive," she said shakily, though her words offered little comfort in the face of such loss. Reuben looked at them and felt a pang sharper than any physical pain. Alive? Yes. But for how long? How could he rebuild? How could he face the world, having poured his labor and pride into sand? For a long moment, he could do nothing but stare. The river had claimed the house like it had always been its own. The walls he had raised in days, admired by neighbors, praised as clever and swift. Now they lay in splintered ruin. This cannot be happening," he muttered, pacing through the mud. "I did everything right. I built quickly. I followed what seemed wise. I planned, I worked." He stopped suddenly, noticing the deep cracks where the foundation had shifted. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It had all been for nothing. The house was an illusion, built on a lie. The villagers looked on silently. Some shook their heads, recalling the teacher's parable. The foolish man builds on sand, and the house will fall. They didn't need to speak. The storm had spoken for them. Hours passed, and Reuben's grief hardened into a searing guilt. He remembered Eliab's words, the quiet man on the ridge, patient and strong. The floods may rise, but they cannot move what God has anchored. How he had laughed at them, how he had mocked the slow, laborious work of the house on the rock, every memory of pride, every boastful smile, every careless decision surged through his mind like another wave from the river. I was foolish, Reuben whispered, tears streaming down his face. I thought speed was wisdom. I thought ease was strength. I built for comfort, not for life. I ignored the Lord's words. He sank to his knees, his head resting in his hands. The lesson of the storm pressed down upon him heavier than the river itself. Faith cannot be rushed. Obedience cannot be skipped. Foundations of sand will not endure. By midday, as the sun began to dry the mud beneath his feet, Reuben lifted his gaze to the ridge. Eliab's house still stood, unbroken, steadfast. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney, a symbol of life and safety. The family inside was safe, warm, and whole. Reuben's heart twisted. Jealousy and shame battled within him, but beneath the anguish, a spark of understanding began to burn. He remembered what he had heard in the synagogue. The Lord is our rock, our fortress. Those who build upon him shall not fall. A whisper of hope stirred in him, faint and trembling. Perhaps there is still time. Perhaps I can learn. Perhaps I can rebuild, not with pride, but with faith. The villagers gathered around him, a mixture of sympathy and caution in their eyes. "Reuben," one said softly, "Eliab's house stands because he trusted God. You trusted your own hand." "I know," Reuben said, his voice low and raw. "I see it now. I hear it now. But how do I start over?" An elder placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You begin where the wise man begins, on the rock, on God. Build your life, your home, your family, upon him, and the storms will come, and you will stand." Reuben bowed his head, feeling the weight of the storm not just on his house, but on his soul. The lesson had been carved in mud and splintered wood, in the fear and tears of his children, in the ruin that lay around him. Hours turned into days, and Reuben did not speak much, but the seeds of change had been planted. He walked the ridge often, studying Eliab's house, observing how each stone was placed with care, how the foundation was deep and steady, how the walls held the weight of the roof with unwavering strength. For the first time, he understood that life's storms test the foundation of faith, not wealth, not speed, not cleverness, not pride. Only obedience to God's word could withstand the floods of life. "I will rebuild," he murmured to himself, "but this time, I will build on the rock, on Christ, on his word." The storm had destroyed his house, but it had awakened something far more valuable, a recognition of what is eternal, unshakable, and true. In the days that followed, the villagers helped Reuben gather what remained. His family, though shaken, was alive. They had food, clothing, and temporary shelter, but the lesson was written in every glance, every story retold. Houses on sand fall. Houses on rock endure. Eliab came down from the ridge, carrying food and blankets. He did not gloat. He simply said, "The storm has spoken for all of us. May we listen?" Reuben nodded, tears in his eyes. "I hear it now," he said. "I see it now. I will not forget." And in that moment, the parable of the wise and foolish builders was no longer just a story told by Jesus. It was life itself, carved in mud, water, and stone. The storm had passed, and the valley lay quiet, save for the murmur of the river returning to its usual course. The villagers still stood in awe, some shaken, others relieved, all marked by what they had witnessed. And it is here, in the aftermath, that the lessons of the parable of the wise and foolish builders become clear, not just in wood and stone, but in the human heart, the mind, and the soul. The story of Eliab and Reuben illustrates a profound truth. The foundation of our lives determines the outcome of the storms we will face. Eliab built upon the rock, Reuben built upon the sand. It is a principle as literal as it is spiritual. From a biblical perspective, Jesus taught that the house on the rock represents those who hear his words and put them into practice. To hear and do is not merely intellectual acknowledgement. It is obedience, integration of divine wisdom into everyday decisions. Faith in Christ becomes a living foundation, shaping not only behavior but perception, priorities, and resilience. Reuben, on the other hand, represents a human tendency that psychology identifies all too well: the allure of immediate reward and easy success. His decision-making was influenced by cognitive shortcuts, favoring speed, comfort, and social approval over foresight, diligence, and adherence to moral principles. Let us pause for a moment to understand the mind at work in such choices. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, foresight, and judgment, is often overridden when humans respond to immediate rewards or social pressures. Reuben's brain prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability. In contrast, Eliab's prefrontal cortex was exercised through deliberate practice, patience, and anticipation of risk. Each stone he placed was an act of strategic planning, a neurological reinforcement of foresight and risk management. His work created what psychologists call cognitive scaffolding, mental structures that support resilience, emotional regulation, and adaptive problem-solving during crises. In other words, the storm did not simply test the houses, it tested the brains and hearts of the builders. Those who train themselves to integrate wisdom, faith, and planning will endure, while those who rely on shortcuts or external validation are more likely to collapse under pressure. The storm in the parable represents the trials of life. It is not symbolic only of natural disasters, but of financial loss, relational conflict, health crises, moral challenges, and emotional upheavals. Jesus' teaching is radical in its simplicity. The same storm falls on all, but the outcome depends on the foundation. Theologically, this aligns with Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Eliab's reliance on God created a secure path through uncertainty. Reuben relied on his own understanding and the approval of others, and his foundation failed. The parable also teaches a psychological truth about habit formation. Human behavior is largely habitual. Our default patterns guide our decisions under stress. Eliab's consistent, disciplined labor was a form of behavioral priming, training himself and his family to endure difficulties, delay gratification, and prioritize integrity over expedience. Neuroscience supports this. Repeated behaviors strengthen neural pathways, making certain choices easier and more resilient under pressure. Reuben, by contrast, built no such pathways. He relied on improvisation, charm, and speed. When confronted with the storm, the real consequences of his choices, his neural pathways were unprepared for crisis. He panicked, failed to adapt, and his house collapsed. Faith, in this context, is not only spiritual but psychologically protective. Studies in positive psychology show that individuals with a belief system grounded in moral and spiritual principles demonstrate lower anxiety during crises, greater capacity for patience and long-term planning, enhanced problem-solving under pressure, stronger recovery from trauma. Eliab's faith was like a scaffold for his mind and emotions. Each act of obedience reinforced a sense of security, purpose, and connection to something larger than himself. This is why, when the storm raged, his emotional state remained calm, while Reuben's panic escalated. The implications of this parable extend far beyond houses. Consider the foundations in your own life. Financial foundation. Are your investments and savings built on research, prudence, and ethical guidance, or on shortcuts and luck? Emotional foundation. Are your relationships grounded in trust, forgiveness, and consistent effort, or in convenience and fleeting approval? Spiritual foundation. Is your faith active, practiced, and integrated into decisions, or dormant, only invoked when convenient? The house on the rock represents integrated living, a life where every decision, small or large, is anchored in enduring principles. The house on the sand represents fragmented living, where choices are reactive, superficial, and easily undermined by life's storms. Psychologically, one of the hardest aspects of the story is the cost of moral courage. Eliab endured mockery, hard labor, and slow progress. His brain had to constantly regulate impulses, manage stress, and resist social pressure, skills we now recognize as executive function and emotional intelligence. Reuben, by contrast, sought the path of least resistance, prioritizing reward and approval. He avoided the grinding of true preparation, and the storm revealed the consequences. The parable also teaches the importance of internalizing Scripture. James 1:22 says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." Eliab's labor illustrates this principle. He heard, he believed, he acted. Reuben, though aware of Jesus' teaching, did not internalize it. Hearing without doing produces vulnerability, just as sand cannot hold a house. Even the Psalms emphasize this connection between faith and endurance. Psalm 127:1 declares, "Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain." Eliab embodies this truth. Reuben demonstrates the folly of neglecting it. Modern science and ancient wisdom converge in this parable. Neural pathways are like foundations in the brain. Repeated acts of discipline, prayer, and adherence to God's principles strengthen these pathways, allowing one to respond effectively under stress. Faith in Christ functions as both spiritual and cognitive rock. It reshapes perception, reduces fear, and encourages proactive rather than reactive behavior. The storm is inevitable, but the foundation determines response, recovery, and long-term stability. The parable of the wise and foolish builders is more than a story about construction. It is a blueprint for life. Build on enduring principles, anchored in faith and obedience. Prepare for inevitable trials, emotionally, spiritually, and practically. Recognize the cost of shortcuts and superficial foundations. Cultivate habits, disciplines, and virtues that strengthen your mind, heart, and soul. Storms will come. Life's floods, winds, and trials will test every foundation. But those who build wisely, on the rock of Christ, on the bedrock of enduring truth, will not fall. Their houses may tremble, but they will endure. Their lives, like Eliab's home, will be a testament to faith in Christ, psychological resilience, and the wisdom of obedience. The rock of Christ represents a foundation built on absolute, unchanging principles. This isn't merely an abstract concept. It is a commitment to a life governed by divine wisdom and moral law. For Eliab, building on the rock meant a slow, laborious process, grounded in foresight and discipline, not in fleeting trends or the path of least resistance. Similarly, Building our lives on Christ's teachings requires prioritizing integrity, patience, and self-control over convenience and immediate gratification. This foundation, unlike the shifting sands of popular opinion or personal whim, remains stable because its principles, love, justice, humility, and forgiveness, are eternal. If this story spoke to you, subscribe for more Christian life lessons and parable insights, and hit the bell to never miss a video. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today.